Hello, everyone, and welcome to Thursdays Live with Chug. Each week, we cover pressing topics that matter to you and your business. I'm Arianna Gonzalez from Chug Attorneys and CPAs, tuning in from our San Diego office. Please join me in welcoming attorney Swapnali Kelkar from our Edison, New Jersey office. Hi there, Swapnali, and welcome.
Hey, hi Arianna, and what a lovely day today, right? The first day of summer. I
Yes,
wish,
exactly.
yeah, so I wish happy summer to all our listeners. And I should thank you for picking up this topic today because I'm pretty sure that many international students out there must be preparing for their, F1 visa interviews, maybe checking out what questions they should expect for their visa interviews, and they must be excited to join the fall semester, which will be starting from August or September. So I think today's session will be helpful to all such students.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. As you mentioned, we will be talking all about the F-1 visa today. Just a quick disclaimer before we get started. This conversation is for informational purposes only. It does not create an attorney-client relationship. So if you have questions, please email us at info@chug.com so we can help you out. Now let's get right into the F-1 visa. So Swapnali, can you tell me who can apply for the F-1 visa?
Absolutely. So, as we know that F1 visa is for international students, right? So, any international student or any foreign national who intends to study in the United States can actually apply for F1 visa. But the question is F1 is the only visa available for international students? The answer is no. There are some other visas available for international students, such as M1 and J1. Then how would I know that should I go for an F1 or whether should I go for an M1 or whether should I go for a J1? Now I'll just try to bifurcate and simplify for those who are trying to pursue their studies in US. So if your coursework and school, which you choose or which you prefer to attend is an SEVP certified, which is Student Exchange Visitor Program certified or approved school, and which offers an academic programs. Such schools you can apply for, and then you can apply for F1 visa. If you are applying for any non-academic or vocational schools in the US, you should apply for an M1 visa. And if you are coming to US to participate in an exchange visitor program, then in that case, you should apply for a J1 visa. So ideally, the course of study which you intend to pursue and the school which you intend to attend actually determines whether you should apply for an F1 visa. So ultimately, any international student who intends to study in the US can apply for F1 visa.
Wonderful. That's really good to know. So, can you touch on what the qualifying requirements are to apply for a student visa?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing is that the student must have been accepted by the SCVP certified school, which must issue him a Form I-20. Remember that only SEVP certified schools can issue a student the Form I-20. And the issuance of this Form I-20 is the actual proof that the student is being accepted in a school. So unless and until the student is being accepted by the school, the student cannot apply for F1 visa. So that's the first step the student should take into consideration. Now, the second requirement and the most important requirement is the intent. So when the student is applying for an F1 visa, it's mandatory for the student to establish what is the intent of coming to US. So when we are applying for an F1 visa, the intent must be solely to pursue a full course of study at an approved institution. And the student should not have any other intentions while applying for the F1 visa. So since F1 visa is not a dual intent visa, you must establish that you have intentions to leave the US at the conclusion of your course of study. So you are entering just to study, and after completing your study, you have all the intentions even to leave the country. So you should establish both the intentions when you're applying for the visa. Another major important requirement for the student is to establish the student had sufficient funds to meet his financial needs. That means he should be able to support his educational expenses, his living expenses while he will be in the US. Now, how can he establish that? He may take support from his family members. That is fine. He may have some financial sponsor. provided he should pick the financial sponsor who will absolutely honor that particular obligation when that financial need will occur. So students has to be a little bit careful when they are relying upon their financial sponsors for their F1 visas. So these, I would say, the basic three requirements, like, you should be accepted by the school. Your intent must be absolutely clear that you're just coming to US just to study, and you should have a strong financial support for your educational and living expenses. Yeah.
Great. So just very straightforward requirements. So you did mention funds. For students who may want to work on an F1 visa, how many hours are they allowed to work on an F1 visa in the United States?
Yeah, so the students may work either a part-time or for full-time. Okay, so part-time is like, up to 20 hours or less than that. And the full-time employment is like, up to 40 hours or 35 to 40 hours. So students are allowed to like, have either the part-time or the full-time employment, provided they have a work authorization. So I'll go further and throw some little bit more insight on what type of different employment avenues are available for an F1 student. Because just now we were talking about that the F1 student must have an intention. The sole intention is to study, study, study. And then we are talking about, hey, can this F1 student also work in the US? So yes, the F1 student can work in the US, and there are different kind of an employment opportunities available for the F1 student. So when the F1 student joins his coursework during the first year, the F1 student may take up an on-campus employment. So what is an on-campus employment? An on-campus employment is nothing but an employment which takes place within the same premises of your school, or maybe it is at any educationally affiliated off-campus location. Okay. The student, once he completes his one full academic year, he may switch to an off-campus employment. Of course, for off-campus employment, the student must get a work authorization from the USCIS. So the student needs to apply for the work authorization, and when the work authorization is granted, the student may work for off-campus employment. Usually for off-campus employment, the student can work if he has some special circumstances, such as, for example, if student is going through some economic hardship, then student can certainly ask for off-campus employment. So if there is any significant change in his financial conditions, certainly a student can ask for off-campus employment, and he can request USCIS for such work authorization. Now, there are other two avenues available for the students for their employment, which is under practical training. Okay. The two types of trainings which students can avail throughout their coursework or after completing their coursework are: the first one is called as CPT, which is curricular practical training, and the other one is OPT, which is optional practical training. Now, what is CPT? CPT is nothing but a practical training program, which is an integral part of an established curriculum, where the students have to complete that practical training so that they can get or earn their degree. Now, if student is receiving 1 year or more full-time of curricular practical training, then such student is ineligible for post-completion academic training. So students has to be a little bit mindful when they are working on CPT. So they should not be exceeding the 12 months period or more than 1 year. They should not be working on CPT. Let's talk about the optional practical training now. The students are entitled to apply for work authorization post-completion of their coursework, and they can begin their employment from the date mentioned on their work authorization document, which we commonly call as EAD. Now, after post-completion, students are eligible for 12 months of OPT, and if a student has enrolled himself in a STEM program, then they are also entitled for another 24 months extension. So that is how, these are different opportunities through which the student can get his employment. One important thing I would say, each student should keep it in mind that a student may be authorized for 12 months of practical training, which is a post-completion practical training, and he may be eligible for another 12 months of practical training if student moves to a higher level of education. So for example, if someone has enrolled in a bachelor's program, he will be entitled for a 12 months practical training, and if he wants to seek another 12 months, the student may move himself to a higher level of education, which is in a master's program. And then he can avail another 12 months of practical training opportunity. Yeah.
Wonderful. Wow, that's all really good to know. So students can be approved to work in the US. That's wonderful. So can we talk about a situation? What happens if an F1 student loses their EAD card? What are the consequences?
Yeah, so unless and until you have an EAD card, student cannot start working in the US. So EAD card is must, even though you might have a 765 approval in your hand, but if you haven't received your EAD card, then what? Can you start your employment? The answer to that question is no. Unless and until you have your EAD card in your hand, you cannot start the employment. So what's the resolution for this? So as soon as student discovers that, hey, I think I have lost my EAD card, he should immediately apply for the replacement card. And as soon as he applies for the replacement card, USS will issue him a notice, a receipt notice. Now, basis that receipt notice, student can work up to 90 days. Okay, so ideally, the USS must be issuing him a new card within the period of 90 days so that student can continue working basis that EAD card. But unfortunately, I have seen some situations where students have applied for the replacement of the card and they haven't received their EAD card within that time frame. And then after 90 days, they have to stop working. So if you're losing your EAD card, make sure that you apply for your replacement card and do those applications immediately so that you can procure your EAD card back within that 90 days window.
Great advice. Thank you for sharing that. So let's talk about how long somebody can stay in the USA on an F1 visa. What's the length, and is there any grace period for exiting the country?
Yeah, sure. So every F1 student is admitted to the US for a duration of status. Now, if you see like any other status, you will have some kind of a date for you, which is like, the end date for my status. But when F1 students are residing in the US, they are admitted in the US for a duration of status. Now, what does this mean? What is the duration of status? So duration of status includes like, the entire time period required to complete the coursework in which the student has enrolled. Plus, it also includes all the additional practical trainings which we have just discussed, like it might be the post-completion practical trainings, maybe 12 months period, or if it's STEM extension, then he is entitled for another 24 months. So your all practical training periods are also included as under the duration of status. And 60 days, additional 60 days grace period is also included in the duration of status. So ideally, if there is a coursework which needs 2 years to complete that coursework, then, and if you are entitled for like, if you are enrolling yourself in a STEM program, then you are entitled for another 3 years of practical training and plus 60 days. Now, within these 60 days, either student may decide to leave the country, as we have already discussed that the ultimate intention of the student should be like, as soon as I have completed my coursework, I should depart. So either he can depart, or if student doesn't want to depart, he may look for some other avenues and he may change his he may try to change his status from F1 to any other non-immigrant status. So that opportunity is available to the F1 student.
Understood. So what about being able to leave and come back? Can a student on an F1 visa leave and come back to the States?
Yeah, absolutely. So student may travel during the period of his duration of status, and it's recommended that students should have short trips, not the extended long trips. Why I'm saying so? Because as we have seen that it is necessary for an F1 student to always establish that he hasn't like lost ties with his home country, because the visa itself is not having any like immigrant intent, but it's a non-immigrant visa. So it's always better if student is having like going back and forth visiting his home country. Those trips will definitely or certainly help him to establish his ties with his home country. However, when the students are traveling, they have to be mindful if they are like in their OPT program, or if they are employed, then any extended trips which are not like authorized by their employers as leave or if those absences are not unauthorized absences by the employer, then all such periods will be accounted towards an unemployment. And any student who is on OPT, if he is within his post-completion OPT, he can be unemployed only for 90 days. And if he is with his term extension OPT, then he can be unemployed for total 150 days. So if student is having extended trips or longer duration trips, all those periods will be accumulated towards his unemployment. And if he is going to cross these limits of unemployment days, then the student is going to jeopardize his status, and he may face some issues while returning back, or if he is within the US, he will be violating the terms and conditions of his status. So every time you plan a trip, just be mindful about it, how long you want to stay outside US. At the same time, do check your visas. So if your visas have already expired or about to expire, and if you have to reapply for your visas, make sure to check if there are any significant changes happen to the circumstances since you have initially applied for F1. If you feel that yes, there are certain changes happen to my F1 status, then I would advise do not travel, because you may face some challenges getting your F1 visa renewed. But if you feel there are no any significant changes, yeah, feel free to have trips, short trips to your home country, go visit your parents, visit your families. Yeah, that's doable.
Really important information. And if you are going through this process and have questions, reach out to us. We'd love to help you out. You can email us anytime at info@chuk.com. So Swapnali, what about dependents? Can students on an F1 visa bring any dependents? And are these dependents allowed to work or enroll themselves in school, for example?
Yeah, great question. Because many times, the students do not have much insight about their dependent status. How should their dependents maintain their status, whether they can bring their dependents. Sometimes there is a confusion about who should be considered my dependents. So for an F1 student, his spouse and his kids under age of 21 can be considered as his dependents. So you cannot consider your parents as your dependents, and you cannot bring your parents on F2 dependent status. Now, whether these dependents can work in the US, of course not. So the F2 dependents are not entitled or not eligible to work in the US. Now, whether they can enroll themselves or whether to school, or whether they can study. Now, of course, if an FL student has kids, certainly the kids can go and enroll themselves into secondary schools or elementary school and all that. But if an F2 dependent intends to enroll himself or herself into a full course of study at a college or university, they cannot do that. So you cannot have a full course of study. Okay. So if any F2 student, so for example, if the spouse of an F1 wants to pursue some kind of full course at some college or university, she cannot do that while being on F2 status. So ultimately, she will have to again apply for a change of status to F1. And once it is granted, then only she can enroll herself to any full course of study. But for any part-time courseworks, certainly F2 students can enroll themselves into any part-time course studies, but not in the full-time full course of studies. Yeah.
Wonderful. That's great to know. So what about changing status? Can I change my status from any other non-immigrant visa, such as the B2 visa, to the F1? And if so, do I need to leave the country to change the status to F1, or can I do that from the United States?
Many times we get these type of questions hey, I'm laid off because of my employer, because of the market situations, or the employer laid me off, somebody who is on H1B, and then he says, what are my options? And then we do suggest that you can change your status to F1. Sometimes we see that there are some visitors and they just want to change their status to F1. Yes, any other non-immigrant can change his status to F1 status, provided they meet certain terms and conditions. But the first, if any other non-immigrant, any person with some other non-immigrant status wants to change his status to F1, the first requirement is that non-immigrant must be lawfully admitted to the United States at the first instance. So you cannot be in the United States illegally and can try to change to an F1 status. Then such non-immigrant must be in a valid status. That means he must be maintaining, he was admitted legally and he is also maintaining his non-immigrant status. Such non-immigrant must not have violated the conditions of his status, should not have committed any type of crimes, or must not have engaged in any type of actions which will make the non-immigrant ineligible for change of such status. And again, like the initial three requirements which we have seen, that to change to an F1 student, F1 status, what is the first requirement is the student must have been accepted by the college, and that college must be an SEVP certified college, and the college must have issued you the form I-20. Then you must substantiate that yes, you have adequate finances to substantiate and support your financial needs while you will be studying in the US. You will be able to support your educational expenses, your living expenses, and all that. And at the same time, as I said, you also have to establish that you have strong ties with your home country. So all these three requirements are applicable. Now, if you want to change the status to F1, that can be done only while you are in the US. Okay, because if you go outside US, then we call it as consular processing and not the change of status. So then you can apply for an F1 visa at the consulate directly. Again, you have to meet all these eligibility requirements, and then you can apply for F1 visa, and if it is granted, you can enter the country with your F1 visa.
Wow, really good to know. So one question we get quite often is, can F1 students start their own company?
Yeah, great question. I think I did many consultations just for this one question when we noticed many layoffs last year or post-COVID. So as I said, to maintain an F1 status, it's necessary. So once an F1 student is in his OPT period, it's mandatory for him to be employed, because if he is unemployed and if he crosses the limit of 90 days or 150 days, then he is jeopardizing his status and he may have to leave the country because he will not be maintaining his status anymore. And then the student wants to understand if they can start their own company, can show that they are employed with their own company, and they can sustain or maintain their status by utilizing their own company. I would say whether the student can start a company is a different question. Yes, there is no prohibition. A student can start his own company, but whether the student can utilize that company so that he can maintain his status is another question. Now, if you are within your post-completion OPT period, yes, you can be employed with the company and you can utilize that employment to establish your OPT employment. But if you are in your STEM OPT, then you may face some challenges, because a STEM OPT employer is one employer who has to be enrolled in an E-Verify program. He must be an employer who is with a good standing. And a STEM OPT employer, he has to come up with a STEM training plan for the student, and under his guidance, the student must be getting that training. Now, imagine if I'm a student, I started my own company, I may have this company E-Verified and all that, but how can I train myself? How can I sign my own training plan or my own training program? And that's the real challenge the students may face when they are trying to have their employment, which is based on their STEM OPT. So in that case, definitely starting your own business is not going to help for the students who are on their STEM OPT period. But yeah, for the post-completion period, certainly that may be helpful to the students to maintain their status.
Wonderful insight. Thank you. Now we are almost out of time, but I want to ask you one more question. Can F1 students apply for a green card?
Yeah, another great question, because I think since beginning we have been just talking that an F1 student should have a non-immigrant intent. He should not be having an immigrant intent. And when you ask me whether he is eligible for or whether he can apply for green card, that means he has an immigrant intent. And the answer to this question is yes. A student may apply for his green card, either it can be an employment based or family based, but yes, he may apply for a green card. So what is important to understand here is the student should have a non-immigrant intent when he is applying for an F1 visa. It's not necessary that he should carry the same intent throughout the duration of status. So he may change his status. So if you are applying for an F1 visa at the consulate, at the time of applying for the visa, it's necessary that you should have a non-immigrant intent. If you're trying to change your status to F1 while being in the US, again, it's very important for you to establish that you have a non-immigrant intent. But once you acquire that status, subsequently you may change and you may apply for a green card. So yes, that path is open for F1 students.
So great to know. Thank you so much for all of your insights, Swapnali. We really appreciate your time and sharing all of this wonderful information with us. That is all we have time for today. So this does bring us to the end of our conversation. Thank you everyone for joining us today. To stay up to date, please subscribe and follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. If this video was helpful, please make sure to give it a like and share it. And if you have any questions or suggestions, please feel free to send us an email anytime at info@chuk.com. We would love to help you out, and make sure to join us back here next week for more pressing topics that truly matter to you and your business. Until next time, stay safe and take care, everyone. Thank you again for joining us, and thank you again, Swapnali.